The dome said goodbye the way it said everything, without sentiment. Emergency protocol complete. Candidate status, reformed. System knowledge, integrated. Convergence role, understood. The protocol wishes the candidate well.
You don't wish.
Kofi said. His voice was a stranger's voice, rougher, drier, scraped raw by 5 days of screaming and swallowing blood.
You process, you evaluate, you teach. Wishing is a human indulgence.
The protocol notes that the candidate is correct. The protocol also notes that 43 years of solitude have introduced certain irregularities into its conversational subroutines. The protocol wishes the candidate well. Kofi almost laughed. The dome had developed a personality. 5,000 years of waiting, 43 years of silence, and the ancient teaching system had grown not lonely exactly. Machines did not get lonely, but something adjacent. Something that made it say goodbye to the boy it had rebuilt, because the next time the dome opened, Kofi would either have saved the system or the system would be beyond saving, and the dome's patience would finally, permanently, have run out. He placed his hand on the panel one final time. The glass was warm. It had always been warm, the same constant, unwavering temperature, neither comfortable nor uncomfortable, the thermal equivalent of the dome's clinical precision. But his reformed mind could read what the warmth meant now. The panel was connected to the root line network's deepest layer, drawing heat from geological processes that had been running since before human beings existed on this continent. The warmth was the Earth's heartbeat, transmitted through 5 kilometers of stone and crystal, and compressed time. His palm bore a new scar. A thin white line across the center, where the skin had split and healed during the breaking. He had gripped the panel so hard that the glass edge had cut to the bone, and the reformed mind had sealed the wound with an efficiency that left no room for clean healing. The scar was precise, surgical, a receipt from the transaction that had rebuilt him, written on the only surface the protocol could not reformat. The protocol reminds the candidate. The previous candidate sealed this chamber because she judged the cost of reunification too high. The current candidate must decide whether she was right.
I will decide after I have seen the chamber and met the others.
Kofi said.
After I understand what the cost actually is, instead of guessing at it the way she did.
The protocol notes that this is the first time a candidate has deferred the decision rather than committing immediately. Assessment. Promising. Promising. He filed it alongside the scar on his palm and the white streak in his hair and the knee that now ground bone on bone with every step. Not validation. Data. The dome thought deferral was promising. The scavenger in him, the part that had survived the protocol's attempt to erase it, the part that had forced the ancient system to build around it rather than replace it, understood why. People who committed immediately were operating on faith. People who deferred were operating on evidence. And the Zagele, for all their geological patience, were engineers. Engineers preferred evidence. He lifted his hand from the panel. The glass cooled instantly. The inscriptions dimmed to a gentle luminescence, not dark, not gone, but settled. Standby mode. The protocol would wait. It had been waiting for 43 years since Zara left. It could wait again. Kofi turned toward the passage. The dome had opened during his training, a tunnel in the sealed layer, lit by crystallized root lines, sloping upward through geological strata toward the nearest guardian node. The amber light followed him to the threshold and stopped, as if respecting a boundary it had set for itself. Beyond, the passage glowed with its own light. The root lines' clean frequency, blue-white and steady. The deep architecture, humming with the patient energy of a system that had been maintaining itself for millennia and would continue maintaining itself until the last thread frayed. He walked. His bad knee protested with a new vocabulary of pain, not the familiar ache of an old bruise but a mechanical wrongness, a grinding catch at the apex of each step that told him something had shifted during the breaking. The protocol did not heal bodies. It rebuilt minds the way an architect rebuilds a house. The foundation might be sound, but the contractor's boots had cracked the tile. The tunnel descended first, then rose. The root lines pulsed on either side like veins in a living wall, their frequency steady and clean at this depth, uncontaminated by the surface corruption that had turned the upper network into a conduit for Tohage's poison. Down here, the system was healthy. Whole. The way it was supposed to feel everywhere, if the factions had not stolen the fragments and spent a millennium calling theft inheritance. The first Guardian node was a chamber carved from compressed quartz, or grown from it, more accurately. The Zagale had not carved the way humans carved. They had encouraged stone to become what it already wanted to be, the way a gardener encourages a vine to climb a wall it was already leaning toward. The chamber was 50 meters across, its walls translucent, its ceiling a lattice of crystallized root lines that pulsed with the slow rhythm of something very old thinking very carefully about maintenance. The Guardian was there. Not visible not in the way that Kofi's human eyes processed visibility, but his reformed mind could read the chamber's frequency, and the frequency contained a presence. Vast, patient, focused on its filtering duties with the dedication of a craftsperson who has spent millennia perfecting a single task. The Guardian did not speak. It did not need to. Its permission was ambient, a gentle modulation of the chamber's light from amber to gold, a warming of the air from cool to comfortable, a smoothing of the tunnel floor beneath his feet. Welcome, go, hurry. The alignment is coming. He passed through 3 more nodes. Each contained its guardian, each granted passage with the same wordless permission. The tunnels between them rose steadily, the geological strata shifting from compressed crystal to raw stone to laterite bedrock, the root lines thinning from pulsing rivers to thread-like tributaries. The system's deep architecture gave way to its surface layer thinner, more fragile, more exposed to the corruption that was eating it from the enskinment chamber outward. Then the root lines ended. The tunnel became natural stone, dry, rough, unworked. No more crystalline walls, no more pulsing light. Just laterite and silence and the mineral smell of earth that had never been part of anyone's system. And air. The first breath of surface air hit him like a fist. Not metaphorically. His lungs, accustomed to the dome's crystallized atmosphere, filtered, constant, perfectly regulated, seized at the rawness of it. Dust particles, pollen, the sharp, dry bite of the harmattan, carrying the smell of scorched grass and heated stone, and something underneath it all that was simply space. Openness, the absence of walls. Kofi stopped walking. His hand found the tunnel wall and he leaned against it, breathing, just breathing, pulling the raw air into his rebuilt chest and feeling it burn. 5 days underground. 5 days in amber light, breathing the dome's clinical perfection. Before that, 14 months in the depths, breathing recycled decay. He had been underground for so long that he had forgotten what uncontained air tasted like. It tasted like the world. The tunnel sloped upward, narrowing, and light appeared at its end, not the amber glow of the dome or the blue-white pulse of the root lines, but a light so vast and formless that his reformed mind spent 2 full seconds processing it before his human eyes simply named it. Sunlight. He climbed the last 20 meters with his hands braced against the walls, his bad knee grinding with each upward step, his eyes narrowing against the growing brightness. The tunnel mouth was a crack in a laterite outcropping, screened by dry grass, unremarkable from the outside. He pushed through the grass and stood upright on the surface of the world. The sky broke him. Not the reformed mind that processed the visual data with its usual clinical efficiency, cataloging wavelengths, measuring atmospheric density, noting the harmattan haze that turned the horizon from blue to gold. The sky broke the scavenger. The boy who had lived in tunnels for 14 months, who had mapped his world in collapsed ceilings and salvaged torchlight, who had measured distance in arm spans and paces, and the number of steps between one pocket of breathable air and the next. That boy looked up at the immensity above him, blue so deep it was almost violence, stretching in every direction without wall or ceiling or end, and his chest locked, and his throat closed, and his eyes filled with water that the harmattan dried before it could fall. The sun was a physical weight on his skin. Warm. Not the dome's clinical warmth, not the root line's geological heat, but warmth that moved, that shifted as clouds drifted, that intensified as the wind died, that found the hollow of his throat and the backs of his hands and the thin skin of his closed eyelids, with the patient specificity of something that had been shining on this exact spot for billions of years, and would continue shining long after everyone who cared about enskinment and corruption and convergence was geological memory. He stood in the sunlight for 11 seconds. He counted. It was the most selfish thing he had done since entering the dome, and he did not apologize for it. Then his reformed mind reasserted itself, and the world changed. The system's architecture overlaid the physical landscape like a second sky. Root lines pulsed beneath his feet clean at this depth, but he could trace their paths northward to where the corruption began, a visible darkening in the golden network, like watching a river's color change, where a tributary of sewage joins the main channel. Shadow bindings flickered in the distance, the Ashvale Order's outposts, diagnostic instruments mistaken for weapons, their hosts' reading system health data they had never been taught to interpret. Encoding frequencies hummed through every enchanted textile in the settlements along the road market awnings. Farmers' fugu, children's garments, all carrying patterns that had been warped by the corruption into the inward spiraling geometry that meant the system was eating itself. It was beautiful. It was horrifying. It was both at once, the way a body is both beautiful and horrifying when you can see the skeleton beneath the skin and the disease in the bone. He had spent 14 months learning what broken things looked like. Sorting through the depths, identifying cracks, cataloging failures, building a taxonomy of decay that let him distinguish between a thing that had broken naturally and a thing that had been taken apart. He had become, through no ambition of his own, an expert in damage. This was the biggest broken thing he had ever seen. The corruption radiated from the enskinment chamber in Ironhaven, visible from here as a black absence in the system's frequency map, a void where the golden network should have been densest and was instead hollow. Tohage's work. The man with half an obsidian face, weaving himself into the boundary mechanism, preparing the trap that would turn the Damba alignment's renewal energy into fuel for his cage. From Kofi's position on the eastern edge of Ironhaven's territory, the corruption looked like a bruise seen from inside the body, not the familiar purple-black of surface damage, but the deep, structural discoloration of something wrong at the organ level. And above the corruption, above the system's architecture, above the beautiful, horrifying overlay of a living network in terminal decline, Ironhaven itself rose against the Harmattan haze like a red wall against a gold sky. Laterite walls catching the morning sun. Damba bunting strung between rooftops in bright celebration. The Lunsi drums practicing Kofi could feel their rhythm through the root lines as well as hear it through the air, the same countdown reaching him through 2 different channels. 3 days to the Damba alignment. He could see the other 3 fragments through his system vision. 3 points of light, each carrying their piece of the Zagale's design, each converging on the same destination. The rejected one's shadow bridge, the listener's communion channel, the last pattern's encoded key, 3 instruments waiting for their conductor. Kofi started walking toward Ironhaven. His bad knee caught at the apex of each step, grinding, and the white streak in his hair caught the Harmattan light, and the scar on his palm pulled tight when he flexed his hand. The protocol's receipts, the body's honest accounting of what the mind had cost. The sun was warm on his face. The sky was enormous above him. The road was dry red earth, cracked by the Harmattan, lined with shea trees whose leaves had given up and fallen, their bare branches reaching toward the sky like hands that had forgotten what they were reaching for. He walked toward the broken thing. The scavenger's instinct had not changed, only scaled. 14 months ago, he had walked toward collapsed tunnels because collapsed tunnels sometimes contained salvageable material. Now, he walked toward a corrupted system because the protocol had shown him what it looked like when it worked, and the difference between the design and the reality was a wound he could feel in his rebuilt architecture like a phantom limb. The music was almost ready to begin. The conductor was on his way. 3 days.